This is Europe. People here feel safe and calm, at least for now.
On the very first day of conflict, artillery will shell all rear areas and drones will fly in.
We're modeling the likeliest scenario.
Is Russia planning to attack Ukraine?
Russia's foreign policy is peaceful. We won't fight Europe.
The Poles said near Bakhmut, "You're fighting for yourselves, not for us."
We need to find the right negotiators, more Orbans.
We're being pulled into a conflict.
Not enough solutions, not enough eggs.
The war continues. People are dying, regions are being captured, and places are being erased from the map. Yet, the trade union prevents any increase in production.
They will succeed with hybrid threats.
Russian drones in Polish airspace.
People are training, traveling by sea, and launching drones. This is a new battlefield, resembling the Ukrainian scenario.
What impact will an attack on NATO countries have on us? Russia keeps launching hybrid attacks on Europe by cutting undersea cables, conducting cyber attacks, and sending drones to European countries. While they don't openly admit it's them, NATO acknowledges that since 2022, over 100 such attacks have occurred.
Add the balloons launched from Belarus along with the payment for the work of certain proxy forces in several countries, specifically Hungary and Slovakia, and there are also some present in Moldova. All of this is carried out with the purpose of creating opportunities to tilt Europe in the desired direction. It might not be for war, but war remains, if not the primary plan, then certainly a backup plan. Europe is asleep. Unfortunately, and to my great regret, Europe has not awakened up to this point. This is a lethargic dream, and every single news outlet is discussing it in detail. Despite Lithuanian officials mentioning that the US sanctions policy is stricter on Russia compared to Europe, there is still a shared border that remains between them. The only location where we have the capability to initiate an attack is within Europe. Europe is currently not taking sufficient measures to adequately prepare for these potential threats. This includes not only the traditional threats, but also the more complex and evolving hybrid threats that are emerging. It is essential for Europe to increase its efforts in anticipation of these dangers to ensure a robust defense strategy.
Former Chief of Staff of the Azov Regiment, retired Colonel Vladislav Sobolevsky, will help us understand the topic. He currently heads the Snake Island Institute, an independent center for defense analysis and coordination that strengthens Ukraine's strategic partnerships with Western security allies. He is also a journalist for Ukrainska Pravda and the author of the book, What to Fight in World War III, Roman Romaniak. You can already start putting pressure on getting more subscriptions and likes.
If we are discussing Russia, their strategy in economic warfare involves selling energy to the European Union. They are succeeding in this endeavor. It is quite self-destructive.
Purchasing something from individuals who might come to harm you tomorrow. And today, they have harmed your friend.
Yes, indeed, this represents a new type of dependence for major nations. People often wonder why target civilian airports. It requires time, money, resources, and drones. Plus, there's always the risk of exposure. This is essentially a training exercise. Individuals are practicing. They set off, travel by sea, rise, disable the transponders, and launch drones. They are discovering their capabilities and limitations. This is an emerging battlefield. We will observe what actions we will take moving forward. It would be quite amusing if Russia were to succeed solely through the use of hybrid threats. But really, why shouldn't they? It's an interesting possibility to consider.
This occurred in Kobit when they arrived to carve it. The mountain stone was under the possession of a dormant dragon. This dragon, which later awoke and incinerated everything in its path, reminds me of Europe today. Essentially, while it remains asleep, everyone assumes it can be managed effortlessly. What harm can it cause there? We can swiftly resolve something from the sidelines here, and the dragon will continue its slumber. However, if you rouse this dragon, it is capable of taking flight and scorching half the world. However, at this time, it remains inactive. To put it differently, even after 4 years of our ongoing conflict, they have acknowledged and started taking seriously the possibility that Russia could potentially attack them if we were to lose or surrender. Even in Poland, which is right next to us, there isn't a strong sentiment that our soldiers who are holding the front line. I remember when I was there during the active battle for Bakhmut, the Poles conveyed to me that, no, you are not fighting at Bakhmut on our behalf, you are fighting for your own reasons. Therefore, this argument is ineffective. They agreed to raise NATO spending and borrow several €100 billion for joint procurement. However, this is such a long-term plan that if an event were to occur tomorrow, it is improbable that any global impact would take place in Europe.
Germany and Poland, they have begun to initiate the launching of these factories that manufacture weapons, making efforts to restart them and commence production once again.
The European arms market is among the most rapidly expanding markets globally. For instance, Rheinmetall has experienced a significant increase in its share prices multiple times over the last few years. This trend is indicative of how American technology companies will expand, similar to the growth seen in the European defense industry in recent years. Poland has acquired thousands of tanks and self-propelled artillery units from South Korea. Indeed, this is in line with our efforts to prepare for a potential conflict with Russia. And even in that situation, they reached an agreement on a certain type of localization. They purchased several hundred HIMARS systems from America, or more precisely, they contracted for them, and they also agreed to localize the production of HIMARS in Poland. However, the European and Western defense industries have these kinds of agreements and contracts. This implies that they might have an agreement today, and they will pay the money tomorrow. Then, in perhaps 5 to 7 years, something will occur, something significant will happen, allowing them to come and inaugurate a plant. However, this involves very long-term planning. It's for those who have the luxury of time to plan, who imagine themselves like those mythical elves in the tales about Peter the Great. Somewhere, there are people and dragons engaged in battles, and here we are, contemplating eternal life, pondering over some timeless, beautiful values, thinking about music and other such things. Meanwhile, somewhere, there's an army of us, capable of making a difference. It's similar in this context. So, these are all projects that require a very long-term outlook. Plus, they are all linked to such heavy military metal, that is, some large installations, some tanks, and again, self-propelled artillery units, particularly these Korean ones. I asked these Polish friends, are you planning to attack Russia? Because if you're planning to launch an offensive, you will need a large number of tanks from these self-propelled artillery systems. For offensive actions, it's suitable, but if they attack you, it won't be of much help. As the Ukrainian war has demonstrated, if you possess a few Rubicons, you essentially have the capability to launch an attack, either with an IMIZs or some type of laser. Essentially, you can mount an attack with a single unit. How many Russian tanks did Lazar destroy? A remarkable 1,500, all confirmed with video evidence. This number is several times greater than the total amount of Western tank assistance provided to Ukraine. He managed to destroy them with just one unit. In essence, I believe all these Polish armored vehicles could potentially be substituted with a laser for the Germans. I'm not predicting the emergence of such warriors, but rather pointing out that the new army, which operates using unmanned systems, will rapidly dismantle these types of armored groups they have contracted. These groups, for which they've paid enormous sums of money, are expected to arrive in Poland within the next 5 or 10 years. In other words, they invest a significant amount of money and plan large-scale projects. However, it's challenging to assert that in the context of a modern war such as the ongoing conflict between Ukraine and Russia, these represent groundbreaking technologies or revolutionary solutions that could swiftly alter the balance of power on the battlefield. Poland manufactures these Pirin manpads, which are quite effective at downing low maneuverability aircraft, and they are also used to take down the Shaheeds. The year before last, Poland made the decision to increase the production of this product by twofold. They spent an entire year experimenting and trying different things. Then, after a year had gone by, they returned to find out that they were still producing the same quantity as before. They wondered what went wrong. It turned out that the guidance head in this Piranha is manufactured by a single factory. This factory is an old, pioneering Soviet-era enterprise, where elderly Soviet engineers and designers work, creating and designing with their characteristic Soviet flair. The producers of this platform came and explained that we require twice the resources to manufacture these heads. They mentioned that producing twice as many heads is not feasible because we have numerous pensioners, and the trade union prohibits them from working overtime. They suggested, well, let's employ other workers for the same factory, allowing them to perform the same tasks during the second or third shift. However, they responded, no, we can't do that, because the union prevents us from hiring new workers until we let go of these older pensioners. And consequently, a trade union at a defense plant can disrupt the whole defense program by multiplying the production of a specific weapon. They find themselves unable to do anything about it. Since it's peacetime, there's not even an emergency situation. In other words, they are experiencing normal peacetime conditions and are governed by the usual European civilian labor laws. In Europe, these laws are quite strict and very conservative when it comes to protecting workers' rights. They can't do anything about it. The war continues. People are dying. Regions are being taken over. Places are disappearing. Land is being drained. And the trade union doesn't let them boost the production of any product. This is a very illustrative example, yet it's not the only one. In fact, there are many stories like this.
Back in the early days, when we were simulating a potential Russian assault on the European bloc, we identified the Suwalki corridor as the most vulnerable point. This narrow stretch of land lies between Belarus and the Kaliningrad region. Capturing it would sever all land connections between the Baltic states and the rest of Europe. Conversely, it would create a land bridge between Kaliningrad and Russia. In the past, such an attack might have involved armored vehicles. However, in today's world, this assault would be executed by individuals operating drones, which represents a significant shift in military tactics. It just so happened that you brought these figures along with you. Among the blue men who play us, there are not only the Ukrainian defense forces of Ukraine, but there are also NATO guys present. However, it's worth mentioning that there are no nuclear scientists among them. We can confidently say that there are indeed many of them in the armed forces. But unfortunately, as of today, no doctrine of using infantry includes the strategic use of drones. Russia is going to initiate this campaign from the Suwalki corridor, starting with a series of drone attacks. They have indeed changed. We have evolved together with them. Today, we possess the utmost expertise in initiating combat operations. Our primary method involves using drones. Every precision strike, every piece of reconnaissance relies heavily on drones. Let's wake up Europe. Of course, we are not moving away from the essential elements like artillery, armored vehicles, and infantry operations. Yet, drones are truly game changers. They change the entire game. Today, this alone is insufficient for NATO countries. So, where can we acquire this capability in Ukraine? Is there any progress being made in this direction? Yes, something is being done, but it's not enough. There is a real possibility of not just facing a limited military campaign from Russia. There is also a significant chance of capitulation. There's a chance to avoid starting a war entirely, leading instead to a terrible negotiation process due to successful hybrid attacks by the Russian Federation. Are they successful in this? Back in the 2000s, they engaged in various acts of sabotage across European countries, and they didn't get away with it. They refrained from traveling, poisoned individuals, and eliminated those they deemed necessary. In contrast, the Euro-Atlantic coalition refrains from any such actions. It does not act aggressively against a state that is sufficiently aggressive. Russia has not become exceedingly weak as a result of the fighting in Ukraine. It also requires a pause in the war, which is what we desire. However, an authoritarian regime will rapidly rebuild its strength, and it will be prepared for new accomplishments. This presents a significant challenge that cannot be easily overcome. Absolutely true.
Can you tell us the balance of power now? We understand that the Ukrainian army is about 1 million strong. What is the size of the NATO army in Europe? Yeah.
I wouldn't calculate it in that manner. In today's world, NATO's forces are not limited to merely a land component. They encompass a wide range of capabilities, providing superiority over Russia in multiple areas. This includes underwater operations, surface operations, and most notably, in the air, where air reconnaissance plays a crucial role. Thanks to a diverse and extensive array of aircraft, such as fighter jets and bombers, NATO maintains a clear and distinct advantage. Additionally, if you take a closer look at the figures presented prior to the release, you'll notice that those highlighted in red signify the presence of drones, which further enhances their capabilities. As I mentioned before, these distinguished gentlemen from Ukraine possess a significant number of drones. However, these individuals lack that capability. it doesn't really matter the number of people you have. So what holds importance in the Baltic states? You can't simply go there. There's no space to position a whole army. There's only room for a few brigades, which would find themselves in a terrible position immediately upon the start of an offensive. This is because they lack depth and don't have rocky roads that could enable the transfer of units across the entire front. Resupply options are limited to the Suwalki corridor by sea or by land. Therefore, the situation appears quite dire. To put it differently, the depth of this Baltic defense front is critically lacking. On the initial day of conflict with the Russian Federation, the entire rear of the army defending the Baltic states will face artillery shelling, accompanied by drones in the skies. Even with air superiority, NATO will maintain air dominance over the Russian Federation. We will observe the enthusiasm of these countries. Is there worry in the Baltic states themselves? Absolutely. There is concern. Are they taking sufficient action? Unfortunately, they are not. This situation strongly reminds me of where Ukraine found itself in the year 2021.
Beside the vast number of Ukrainian paraphors in Vilnius, there's a striking image in the city center. People who are on vacation and the NATO umbrella that should protect them in case of emergency. People here strongly believe that if Russia were to launch an attack, NATO would definitely step in to help.
Absolutely, without a doubt. The West places significant trust in contractual agreements. When you give your word, you are expected to honor it. Contracts hold immense importance. We have a binding agreement with NATO.
How do you respond to Russia's comments on the Baltic states?
It's become such a common topic that people don't discuss it as much anymore. It seems that many are growing weary of it and losing interest.
Could Russia attack the Baltic states?
Yes, definitely.
Is the situation tense?
Indeed.
Are people afraid of a Russian return?
Of course. We're aiding Ukraine significantly.
And if NATO does not provide assistance to you, what will happen then?
Then what happens next? It will escalate into a global crisis because leaders fail to keep their promises. We might assume such an event could occur, but not at this moment. Russia is considered a weak nation, with weak individuals, a weak military, and weak political standing. We support Ukraine. We understand that if you fall, Russia will come here.
The United States is a crucial part of NATO. Trump frankly lacks respect for Europe. Do you believe he would defend it? Here's a quote for you. A president of a major nation stood and asked, "Sir, if we don't pay and Russia attacks, will you defend us?" I replied, "No, I won't defend you. In fact, I'd urge them, meaning Russia, to do whatever they want. You must pay your dues." Trump wants Europeans not only to spend 2% of GDP on defense, but also to buy American weapons. At the same time, the United States is no longer the world's security guarantor.
Because it has the ambition to become the world's ultimate decider. People didn't pay much attention to Trump when he was discussing these ideas during the campaign, despite the fact that he openly shared his plans. He championed the idea of peace through strength. This concept suggests that the power centers like the Russians and the Chinese behave like bulls. Picture all the gentlemen seated at the table, and then two unruly, drunken bulls enter, creating chaos. Kim Jong-un does not engage with the rest of the world in the refined manner of English gentlemen. He's starving his people to build a missile. Uncivilized conversations occur. Then, the leader of what we call the free world questions, why are we pretending everything is normal? Let's begin communicating with these people in a language they comprehend. Let's seize this location, drown this individual, kidnap that person, and shoot these individuals from an airplane. They will soon realize we can communicate in this manner too. First, second, after World War II, global security was ensured by the Americans. At first, they gained significant economic advantages from this, but over time, a calm and stable world became the norm. all individuals have the ability to freely access the ocean, allowing for the transport of goods between different jurisdictions without the fear of encountering pirates. This is not a random occurrence, rather, it is due to the presence of American fleets that patrol the seas on a global scale, ensuring the security of trade routes for everyone involved. And who pays for it? The Americans do. Who benefits from all this? Everyone else. This imbalance has grown so significant that the Americans have said it cannot continue. Now, a major conflict is on the horizon. Consider the Chinese. What are we going to do about them? If we confront them one-on-one now, we will overpower them. However, the only solution is for you to join us. We have been the ones funding this. All European security, what is it based on now? A few land components are scattered throughout this. The American presence includes both land and air forces. Furthermore, the nuclear weapons are American, the Navy is American, and the missile systems are also American. Essentially, everything is American. Germany continues to host the largest number of American bases in Europe. Americans often question, what are they doing here? Why can't you recruit your own forces and replace them with your own personnel? We spend billions and billions of dollars each year to maintain this army here. Why?
Because you are the world leader, the world hegemon.
So, let's assume you keep your head down, and we will ensure you have top-level security. This includes nuclear weapons, aircraft that you lack, bombers that you don't possess, and large carrier groups at sea. We can sail in at any time to provide security there. Moreover, as a last resort, if you suddenly fail, we can connect with the land component. But why should we offer you security in places like Poland, the Czech Republic, or Germany? Security. And you are simply, well, after German and various other things.
We are accustomed to this, and after World War II, Americans themselves imposed this format.
Obviously, Europeans have become accustomed to it, yes. The Americans then gained advantages from this situation, as they were left out. They managed a portion of the world that was fragmented. There was no European Union back then, if you recall, after the Second World War. They established individual agreements with each country and extracted resources from Europe. This region is the most financially stable market globally, so inherently, having control over it offers excellent opportunities. What Trump is currently attempting is to disrupt the European Union once more. It is necessary for us to take this action in order to regain the ability to control each and every player within the European market once more. No other country compares to America on its own, but collectively, they become a formidable force that can challenge America. For instance, when it came to securing this loan for Ukraine known as the reparations loan, at the end of last year, the situation arose when the Americans halted their financial support and aid to Ukraine. At that moment, someone needed to step in to ensure some form of security due to the enormous costs involved. If you manage to gather 50, 70, or even $100 billion, then you truly become a significant player on the global stage. And if you can't do it, no European country could manage it alone. However, the European Union could certainly achieve it together. Thus, it stands as a significant player on the geopolitical map. This situation doesn't sit well with Donald Aloisevich and his friend Vladimir Vladimirovich. That's why these frictions exist. But on a global scale, if we set aside our personal dislike for Trump himself, what he is doing is merely the actions of those who have taken control of the continent, this North America. They were the same uncles, solely focused on material values. Leave all other values in Europe, within your courts. Our interest lies in capturing gold, killing Indians, acquiring land, bison, oil. But all this, well, lyrics, spirituality, and everything else can come later. For now, our focus is on seizing material values. And so they return to the game in this manner, like this, like this. They used to be. It is not a fact that the world, which they wish to return to this way of acting, will accept this behavior again. Because if you look now, in the late summer or fall, they have midterm by-elections for Congress, and it is already clear that the Republicans are going to lose them by a large margin. Why is this happening? Because the world simply doesn't accept this style of behavior anymore.
What is the United States currently doing? It's making efforts to awaken us. It's also striving to awaken Europe. How does this manifest in reality? We must boost defense expenditures significantly. We must draw individuals to enlist in the military. Additionally, we must enhance conditions for the contract-based army. We need to be more actively engaged in the conflict in Ukraine. When discussing the coalition of the willing, there exists a list of nations that have joined. Yet there is also an extensive list of countries that have declined. Furthermore, within the coalition of the willing, not all are even prepared to deploy their own military forces to Ukraine. It was about 6 months ago when we were in discussions, negotiating the timing of when our Western partners should arrive to assist us.
If something happens, it will stop. And then
They mentioned that initially the fighting ceases, and subsequently they deploy the troops. I am not entirely sure about the reasoning behind these actions. However, perhaps it might provide us with some benefit. Yet, once more, upon arrival, if faced with the decision of selecting a Ukrainian soldier with combat experience, I would opt for a Ukrainian. In Germany, the youth protested when their leader requested them to just update the data in our language. And they wrote on posters, "Give me vodka and you go to military service yourself." This type of liberalism is what will end up destroying Europe.
Vitalista. The administration doesn't want it.
they were trained to kill or prepared for a possible front.
For them, military service is a threat to freedom and self-determination. And today they want the authorities to hear this argument.
We do not wish to prepare for war. We do not want people to be compelled to learn to kill.
Let's head over to Bautzen in eastern Germany. Every Monday, people gather here for anti-government rallies. And wow, look at those Russian flags. The peace doves don't see Russia as an enemy, but believe they're only being shown part of the truth.
Russians are labeled barbarians, and Ukrainians are made into angels. This is a thoroughly corrupt state with nationalists and fascist worship. These are the great heroes. This is absurd. Zelensky is constantly given a platform, although we don't even know if he speaks on behalf of his people or just himself and his fist. You will never hear the Russian point of view about the war on German television. It is constantly silenced. And, naturally, the Russians have their own reasons for this war, but they won't disclose them to the Germans because of you.
They are absolutely convinced that Putin will never launch an attack on Europe. Now let's delve into other points. We used to engage in trade with Russia, and everything was perfectly fine. There's no need to get involved in Ukraine, as it is merely an internal conflict. Russia is just reclaiming its territories, much like how the Germans lost some of their land after World War II. Due to the war, everything in Germany has become more expensive. We send substantial amounts of money to Ukraine, and they say it's all stolen there. By the way, Case Mindichem supports this argument right here. Moreover, the idea of Ukraine as a new Israel is growing, and images from Uman.
Due to our involvement in the war, we are increasingly becoming impoverished. Billions upon billions are being spent on weapons and funds directed to Ukraine. Meanwhile, here at home, we lack sufficient resources for free lunches. We are short on funds for child benefits, which we are considering reducing. There's not enough money for health insurance, and even pensions are affected. We simply don't have enough to ensure a decent quality of life. This war is not for ordinary people, both in Ukraine and in Germany. This war is being waged because people are profiting from it. People make fortunes from it. Billions and billions are flowing in, and the elite are appropriating some of it.
The next narrative. Zelensky released all the young people. They came here and are supported by the German state. They should be fighting, not living off our money. Instead, Zelensky wants Europeans to go to war in Ukraine. Well, this is the kind of mess in my head with Russian flags in the center of Europe. Let me remind you that it is Germany that should be the leader.
Europe after the U.S. withdrawal. And today, the isolationism of the United States, when the United States, and we have to discuss this, is pulling back from Europe, is actually a pragmatic and correct narrative. Is there enough population here to defend itself? The answer is clear. Yes, there is enough. Is there sufficient economic potential to establish a new defense industry and enhance our own military forces? Yes, indeed. However, there are not enough decisive actions, not enough courage. I believe the U.S. and Ukraine, no NATO, and the United Nations don't work.
Often people dismiss NATO's Article 5, which requires all members to act if one is attacked. Do you believe this is a working mechanism here?
I believe Finland mentioned just yesterday that Article 5 concerning Ukraine cannot be applied. As it stands, what the United States is aiming to achieve at this moment is to organize a way for NATO to actively support Ukraine if an attack were to occur. However, we have a NATO member stating that such an action is not feasible. This raises questions about how NATO can effectively respond in this situation.
Why do you believe that? Are they simply scared of having to defend us?
Yes, because what they do regarding Ukraine and how they handle a war situation have an impact on their electoral preferences domestically. This is the reason they are pragmatic and tend to be skeptical. A contemporary liberal European would avoid going to war.
Everything's generally fine worldwide.
We wouldn't want to either.
We wouldn't like that.
However, we absolutely must do it. A strategically weak Europe gives a huge advantage to Russia. That's the bottom line we cannot ignore. Any action that leads to a weaker Europe is considered a success for Russia. On the other hand, the United States takes a broader, more global perspective. They are dealing with the issue of Taiwan. I really believe that all available resources will be directed towards this potential future confrontation, whether it turns out to be hybrid or armed. China is extremely sensitive to such statements and considers Taiwan as its own territory. Meanwhile, the United States views Taiwan as a sovereign nation. And according to all the opinion polls conducted, Americans display a notable readiness and willingness to fight for Taiwan. It's a significant level of willingness, almost as if Taiwan were considered one of their own allies. This is precisely the manner in which the mass media and public focus are being shaped. We must engage in this battle. Without the chips that are manufactured in Taiwan, we stand to lose our strategic advantage in the future. Even if there is no war, China will eventually purchase everything and rise as a global leader through its soft power, just as it is currently doing. We discussed rare minerals and earth metals. Noting China's production advantage, we explored their uses in global market dynamics, focusing on China's edge in the supply chain. In the mining and enrichment of rare earth metals, China currently holds a significant strategic advantage. At this time, China produces approximately 300,000 tons of neodymium magnets. These magnets are commonly found in various devices, such as your phone or your microphone. In contrast, the United States, for its F-35 fighter jet, has established a plant. Although it is a significant facility located in the Northern Territory, it has only achieved a production level of about 1,000 tons annually. To put this in perspective, that's 300,000 tons compared to just 1,000 tons each year. America is considering this matter deeply. It would indeed be the optimal solution for them on a global scale to have the Russian Federation as an ally. This alliance would allow them to engage in trade together, to jointly develop the Arctic Ocean shelf, and to explore and develop their subsoil resources in collaboration with Russia. Such a partnership would also help to distance Russia from China's influence. Consequently, in a future conflict or confrontation with China, the Western world would be in a significantly stronger position. However, there is the issue of Ukraine, which presents a complication that needs to be addressed. Ukraine must either be pacified or appeased in some manner. Just die there, please, everyone. How much longer can this go on? Because the Ukrainian issue does not allow us to make friends with Russia in a normal way. Does Russia want to escape the clutches of China and fall into the hands of the United States? I believe it does, for sure.
They want Europeans to stop trading with the Chinese. Before Trump came along, there was an annual negative trade balance of $400 billion. Americans were purchasing more from Europe than they were selling to Europe. Meanwhile, Europe had a negative balance with China amounting to 350 billion euros. Each year, 400 yards of American money flowed through Europe to China. Moreover, when you include the negative trade balance between the United States and China, these were not merely large amounts, but truly astronomical sums. And they are attempting to somehow balance their trade over there. They tell the Europeans, folks, let's stop supporting them financially. Basically, Russia has developed by purchasing inexpensive gas, and as a result, everything they accomplish is funded by your money, because you filled their coffers with money. Cheap gas went to Germany, Merkel, and Nord Stream. Everyone remembers who financially supported Putin. So now he is relying on Chinese money. Because only China, India, and a little bit of Iran are involved. In fact, China is paying for this war that Putin is waging. That is, it buys oil, gas, goods from him at discounts, takes over the market of electronics, technology, cars, everything that is there in Russia. In other words, it is, in fact, absurdizing Russia bit by bit. And through this, Russia manages to accumulate money to wage its war. And the Americans are saying, folks, we need to redistribute these flows. We cannot feed China, because if China starts acting like Russia is acting now, there is no power in the world that can hold it back. Do you get this or not? What I mean is, we need to begin cutting off its resources, at least not supporting it, or else we will face a problem that we won't be able to solve.
How realistic do you think this scenario is, that Russia breaks through a corridor to Kaliningrad, cuts off and annexes this territory?
Is there a threat? Yes. Are they ready? Not at all.
Are the Russians prepared? Do they have the power?
They have not yet engaged in total war, and Ukraine, in principle, hasn't either. We've established a manageable model for ourselves, where, if you're residing in a city away from the front lines, you continue to live a somewhat civilian life. You might pay slightly higher taxes, just a bit more, and that's all. Meanwhile, there are military personnel who handle the war efforts. This model, although not entirely fair to the military, is effective for Ukraine. Russia has developed its own model. It's just like ours. There is another model, which is an all-out war, where everything will be aimed at achieving victory. Every car, every individual will consume less and earn a lower salary. Or perhaps they won't receive a salary at all, but only food. This situation has occurred before. Such measures will release a significant amount of energy, enabling us to accomplish all necessary tasks. We are already employing the same terminology as during the Second World War: the armies of evil. However, in this war against evil, the states involved are just somewhat different. Russia, Iran, and North Korea.
China.
We
discussed a theoretical offensive against other European countries beyond just the Baltic states. You mentioned there's no room for such actions. Russia can't launch an offensive against Berlin due to limited space. They need to capture Ukraine first, then advance on a broad front. Could you explain this further?
Actually, if Ukraine were aligned, aligned with Russia, there would be significantly more opportunities available on NATO's eastern flank. If we were to fall, I believe that Europe might not recover, and we would find ourselves living in an unfamiliar and strange new world, in which, unfortunately, there will be no place for individuals like me. Overall, Ukraine, as a powerful entity, would be quite essential in the future Russian Empire. After all, we possess the skills to fight, we have numerous vital resources, and most importantly, or as the third key point, is our territory. This territory can already be utilized to foster success, as I mentioned, in the Carpathian region. Meanwhile, the question of whether Russia will confront us directly is still unanswered as of today. Would they rather improve their relations with the European Union and perhaps, for example, restart this major energy export? I truly believe they would prefer that. The issue at hand is that the European Union's ultimate goal is to achieve economic prosperity, whereas the current primary objective of the Russian Federation is to rebuild the Russian Empire. This isn't just Putin, it's a collective Putin.
You've already talked about this point, that if they attack, we will have allies who will feel what war is, who will understand it all. But on the other hand, could it be that our allies will simply not care about us, and they will focus more on their armies, invest there and not let us...
Geography dictates they must stand beside us. The Ukrainian front's presence or absence means that around 500,000 to 700,000 Russian troops are either engaged there or free to be moved elsewhere. When faced with the option of forming an army capable of containing these 700,000 troops on your own, or supporting the army already containing them, the decision becomes clear. The choice is evident. The geographical positioning compels them to align with us, because if the Ukrainian front is maintained, these Russian troops remain occupied there. Otherwise, they can be redeployed to a different operational theater. Thus, when the alternative is to raise an army to hold these troops yourself, or to aid the existing army already doing so, the decision is straightforward. It is apparent that the choice is unmistakable. You will assist those who are already engaged in this, not within your own territory, but rather on theirs. As a result, the logic of war will unavoidably impose the necessity for close collaboration and an actual military alliance, as opposed to merely these appealing formalities. Someone from the new American administration remarked that our European allies excel in crafting eloquent statements. However, when action is required, their productivity falls short. It's a very sarcastic observation, yet it holds a significant amount of truth. Now, all of the support we have been receiving throughout these years of war is centered on this. we are discussing the endorsement of declarations, the signing of hundreds of aircraft agreements, and memorandums of understanding. However, in reality, we are battling with the resources we currently possess.
While preparing this issue, an article appeared stating that the Ukrainian military defeated NATO troops in joint exercises. Believe me, this isn't a one-time story. The war has changed significantly, and our partners just can't keep pace. Following that, I saw a statement by NATO Secretary General Rutte, who said that if Russia attacks now, we will win. To me, this sounds quite arrogant. Let me remind you, this is the man who recently returned from Ukraine and claimed he spoke to a dog with a gun. He said we won't give up.
The most beneficial strategy for us, both as friends and partners, is to create a long-term peace. First, we should aim for a temporary halt in Ukraine with terms that are mutually beneficial. This involves reorganizing Ukraine and its armed forces, and ultimately reaching a peace that can endure. This task is a significant joint effort, often without recognition. Then, there appears to be a sort of restoration or reinstatement of the status of the CFE, which is taking place. However, it appears that there might be a temporary halt in the ongoing conflict, along with a period of de-escalation from all our Western allies concerning this issue. Despite this, the military expertise of Ukraine is crucial for ensuring the effective defense of Europe in the future. We are still in the initial stages, and our partners have yet to grasp the implementation of this strategy fully. They are uncertain about the necessity of increasing their tax contributions towards defense. Moreover, they need to rethink their perspectives on military doctrines and the strategic deployment of drones in combat situations. Overall, the latest technologies are crucial. Drones are at the forefront. There's a whole array of them. But we should discuss RAP, which has evolved over time, and marine drones as a distinct force. We, lacking a fleet, managed to drive the entire Black Sea fleet into a single port, Novorossiysk, where it was hidden behind booms and barges. European countries surrounded by seas and oceans lack this kind of experience. We really need to accelerate. Because Russia is also learning and adapting. I can easily compare any European country today with Ukraine of the years 1921 minus 1922. They have done nothing substantial, and neither did we, essentially, back then until we finally woke up.
When the missiles started flying.
When the missiles were launched. So there will likely be a similar story somewhere. What is a significant driver in Europe today? These hybrid threats. However, this is not nearly enough. What else is involved? Economic advantages. In every business where the term drone or artificial intelligence comes into play, this business will begin to expand rapidly. Any autonomous system is considered a gem today. Large manufacturers are striving to integrate innovative solutions into the military forces of various countries. Their sole objective is to sell. What exactly is the task at hand? Is it to alter the doctrine? To modify the approach to war? The objective is to incorporate the experiences developed by Ukrainians into our doctrines to prepare for future threats. However, when you are situated in France, observing the distance to your nearest threat, it seems distant. This is why progress is gradual.
Listen, have they begun to financially support Poland and provide more weapons? Absolutely.
I'll tell you more. Poland will even assist Lithuania in establishing a training center near the Suwalki corridor. No one is idle, but their pace is certainly insufficient.
And if we take into account the scenario where the war in Ukraine does not cease, and at the same time, Russia launches an attack here, what would happen? I mean, I understand that theoretically, if they decide to deploy one of their armies, they could achieve this task and take it here. How would this impact us? Wouldn't it result in Europe being entirely focused on this war, and we would somehow be left out or affected?
Is there any possibility? I truly believe that before reaching that point, there should be a significant strategic shift towards fostering the deepest cooperation with China. In my opinion, the United States still possesses opportunities to influence Russia and bring it over to its side. Isn't this what is happening right now? I am convinced that such proposals were indeed made to the Russians immediately after the new administration assumed office. However, no decision has been made yet. An attack on the Baltic states would signify a clear and definitive point of no return. Then no more chances to talk.
After Alaska, they mentioned that they talked about the potential of forming a specific American-Russian consortium. Essentially, it would be like Rosokrenergo, but instead it would be Rosamerenergo. This consortium would own all the energy, oil, and gas at the Russian border and sell it to Europe as American oil and gas. The Americans would receive a margin from this arrangement. For instance, such possibilities. To the Russians, in principle, it's quite unpleasant because it's always much more pleasant to cling to some Austrian chancellor, to personally hold on to these comfortable and warm seats. However, now they are prepared to delegate this function to American intermediaries, yet they still want the chance to earn money, return, and impact the European energy market. This situation applies to all other trade, technology, and the removal of sanctions as well. What they truly need is to get back into the top geopolitical league, not as outcasts, but in a similar standing as before. To achieve this, they are willing to fight, negotiate, make deals, and do whatever is necessary, because this is their primary interest. However, clearly, sanctions need to be lifted, and trade restrictions should be eased. It's akin to maintaining dignity in order to continue influencing the world.
Do you believe that if there is such a significant blow, they won't awaken? You mentioned that the dragon might awaken.
Perhaps, but many individuals are striving to prevent it from awakening. Who are these people? The Russians and the Chinese. This is certainly enough to instill fear. Consider this. All the far left and far right destabilizing elements in Europe receive funding from both the Chinese and the Russians. It doesn't matter to them whether it's the far left or the far right. Their primary goal is to disrupt the balance. Their main objective is to shatter the status quo. And now, a third force has joined them, the Americans, who are staunch conservatives, almost like magicians. In Europe, we're witnessing reforms occurring in places like Turkey, France, and Hungary. Essentially, wherever there are strong conservative forces on the far right, the Americans are making efforts to support these groups. Their aim is to counteract the influence of the Chinese in certain regions and to establish their own influence in others, similar to what we've seen with Reform UK and Britain. To put it another way, the three major global players are actively working to destabilize these forces and are doing everything possible to ensure they don't remain a unified power.
Consider conditional aggression against Poland, for instance. Could this potentially foster some form of insularist sentiment within the European Union? Absolutely it could. Why should individuals from Luxembourg, Italy, and France be compelled to fight for the Poles? They might not even harbor any fondness for the Poles. That's the point. Europeans tend to believe there exists some sort of alternative.
To agree.
They will sweat it out. Let's ensure we stop these people using the hands of Ukrainians. After that, we will continue to live, allowing the U.S. to handle Venezuela and Cuba while leaving us alone in Greenland. The most important thing is that they lack a clear strategy. From my perspective, their agenda keeps changing constantly, and they are reevaluating their own ideas. This is because the coalition of the willing is their concept, to send us their own armed forces. I don't understand this decision. However, you are unable to gather even 200,000 individuals to come here and receive new knowledge and training alongside the Ukrainian military. And this would enable them to have more effective armed forces back home. Even if this is not the case, at the same time, cables are being cut, cyber attacks are carried out, and people are killed in various countries. Balloons are launched towards Lithuania. They are testing the strength of this entire bloc by sending migrants from Belarus to Poland. This is a small yet interesting story.
Among the military and intelligence officers, I believe this view is also accurate. If the Russians had attacked Latvia or Lithuania instead of us back in 1922, the entire war would have unfolded in a completely different manner. They would have achieved their military objectives much more swiftly. Their plan was to swoop in quickly, fly on planes to Gostomel, and seize Kyiv within just 2 days. This was demonstrated 2 weeks later, when Russian tanks were conventionally positioned at the border of western Ukraine. However, they didn't consider the intense hatred directed at them, nor did they consider the vast scale of the country and the substantial resources Ukraine had gathered to resist. Yet, if they had attempted to sever the Baltic states, most analysts agree that they were successful, and the impact was so frightening and paralyzing for Europe and, in principle, for the entire Western world, that they could have halted their actions there. They might have even stopped the supply of weapons to Ukraine, along with financial, military, and other forms of support. Moreover, Achieving the withdrawal of certain NATO forces to previous positions is significantly quicker when there is a clear demonstrative picture showing how rapidly the Baltic states are falling. This visual evidence greatly accelerates the process. That, theoretically, they might not have needed to engage in such a bloody conflict in Ukraine. However, luckily for the Western world, it ended up being the Russians who launched the attack on us, not the other way around. This means they can keep on speculating about whether NATO's Article 5 would have actually been effective or not. But let's not forget, all these endless speculations come at the cost of Ukrainian soldiers' blood. This is the reason I am convinced that sooner or later, there will be direct aggression from Russia against a few NATO countries. I'm just joking, but it could potentially occur in that small, narrow region, such as in the Baltics, for example. And, to be completely honest, perhaps it might actually be advantageous for us in some way. Because we would need to consider several factors, such as political, economic, and social implications. Mobilization involves a comprehensive approach that includes strategic planning and coordination across various sectors. It requires understanding the historical context, assessing current geopolitical dynamics, and evaluating potential outcomes. Then, there would be no options available that could be considered. It would be impossible to say, no, let's not accept Ukraine into the fold because it will bring war to us. Because by then, the war would already be present. And Ukraine, as it should be positioned strategically, will become part of the solution rather than part of the problem. So obviously, I don't want a world war to erupt there, but considering what is happening, the preparations being made, and how the cards are being played, it seems Donald Trump is quite favorable to them. It seems to me that this is some kind of civilizational clash. It is inevitable.
Foreign intelligence agencies warned Ukraine about a full-scale invasion. Now we are trying to shout out to Europe. Recently, when he was still the head of the Guru, Kirill Budanov met with foreign ambassadors at a media event.
One potential scenario is a Russian attack on the Baltic states. There was an ambassador from a European country, possibly also from the Baltic states, who mentioned, well, first you will be attacked, then you, and then you. Their reaction to such candidness and honesty was quite sensitive, so to speak. Budanov is a person you want to trust, but there's also a fear in doing so.
Each and every one of us has the potential to contribute more in the fight against evil. Just like these figures, anyone has the capability to print them at home. Drukarmia generously creates these sets at no cost and sends them to the military to help improve their skills. We encourage you to join in on this effort. You can find more details in the first pinned comment. Drukarmia will be there to guide and assist you throughout the process. We extend our gratitude to them for their invaluable help in preparing this material. By the way, we will be translating it into English, complete with voice and subtitles. Therefore, kindly share it with an international audience. Additionally, please support our project by subscribing, liking, and becoming a sponsor of our channel.